So pressure injuries, let's talk a little bit about what they are and who is supporting us and learning a little bit more about pressure injury prevention. So for those of you who are not already familiar, the EPUAP, which is the European Pressure Injury Advisory Panel, and the NPIAP, the North American Pressure Advisory Panel, as well as the Pan-Pacific Pressure Injury Alliance, they provide global interprofessional leadership to improve patient outcomes in pressure injury prevention as well as management. And they provide education as well as guidance on public policy and also research. And they have published their latest guidelines this year in 2025 that provide evidence-based information through recommendations, directions, and also good practice statements. And then some exciting news for us in Canada. In November of 2020, we saw the launch of a Canadian Pressure Injury Advisory Panel. So that's exciting to weigh in. And they look at the challenges when it comes to pressure injuries in Canada. So we actually have some stats here that aren't that new, but from CIHI. This is the most recent stats that we have that look at what is the cost of a pressure injury in Canada to the healthcare system. So in 2018, the cost of a pressure injury ranged from 44 a stage 2, 44,000 to 90,000 to treat, compared with a Canadian study that saw 11,000 to 1850 for pre-admission pressure injuries. This second study removed the cost of labor and nursing care from the assessment of the cost. And then the RNAO, the Registered Nurses Association, they estimate that treating pressure injuries can increase nursing care by up to 50%. So significant for labor and utilization of our resources to treat pressure injuries and significant cost to the healthcare system, but also a significant increase in morbidity for people who have pressure injuries. So people can be very sick from pressure injuries. They can also die from pressure injuries. I don't know if it's well known, but Superman, Christopher Reeves, actually died from sepsis from a pressure injury. So even Superman is not safe. There's also the cost of the reduction of quality of life. Nobody wants a pressure injury, a hole in their heel or their backside, to be dependent on people for their care. They're very painful. And then they also cause a loss of social engagement and productivity for a lot of folks. So there's a wide range of negative impacts from pressure injuries. And then on the right here, there's a little bit of prevalence. So in Canada, it was estimated in long-term care, the prevalence of pressure injuries was 29.9%. Now, again, this is from 2018, but we haven't seen much change despite all of our best efforts in reducing pressure injuries. So when it comes to the cause of pressure injuries, there's a lot of complex interplay of different factors, many of them intrinsic, so specific to the patient, that can be maybe slightly modified, but not all of them modified. But when it comes to prevention, what we're looking at is these 5 extrinsic factors of pressure injury development. How can we modify these? And they are pressure, shear, and friction. So shear is pressure plus friction at the same time. And then the last 2, temperature and moisture, we consider these under microclimate management. So how hot and how moist is the skin? So let's look at kind of like an overarching approach to managing pressure injury prevention, and then we'll kind of break it down into small steps. So when you're building your site's healthy skin program, the first step is to, of course, evaluate your baseline of your program. We can't treat things that we can't measure. We can't affect things that we don't measure, right? So first you want to assess your program and to see which components you have in place already, what's going well and what's not serving you. And then the next thing is auditing your tools. So what kind of equipment do you have in place? What kind of resources or management tools? How do we care plan and guide practice, the tools that you're using in your care right now? And then it's also important to look at your team's knowledge level of pressure injury prevention, as well as your team's skill in managing pressure injuries, and also looking at your team's attitudes towards pressure injuries can be very helpful. So first you want to look at your incidents. Are you close to the norms, below the norms, or above the averages for pressure injuries? The tools would be things like mattresses, patient handling equipment, access to nutrition, things like that. And then maybe putting together a questionnaire from the resources about what is a pressure injury, how do you manage a pressure injury, what can we do to manage pressure injuries for your staff. So these are all recommended in the NPAP guidelines. Oops, sorry, I have to go to my other screen to change slides. Okay, so care bundles for improving quality of care. Bundles are becoming increasingly popular in streamlining efficiencies when it comes to improving quality of care. So here's some information from the Institute of Healthcare Improvement about what is a bundle and what a bundle isn't. So a bundle is a structured way of improving the processes of care and patient outcomes. It's a small, straightforward set of evidence-based practices, generally 4 to 6 items, that when we perform them collaboratively and reliably have been proven to improve patient outcomes. So a bundle is helpful for making appropriate clinical decisions and also to set expectations for the whole team about how to deliver consistent best practice care. Although a bundle may look like a checklist, it really doesn't work quite the same way, in that it can only be considered successful if all of the items are completed. There's no part marks for checking off a few of the boxes from a bundle. The outcome is either yes, the bundle was completed, or no, the bundle was not completed. And even if 5 or 6 items were checked off within a given time frame, skin bundles are recommended as best practice in pressure injury prevention by both the NPAP and the European Pressure Injury Advisory Panel. And this is the current best practice guidelines for managing prevention of pressure injuries. So designing a bundle for a long-term care, there's kind of 2 steps to putting together your bundle in such a way that motivates and speaks to your team. So your evaluation of your team's attitudes and skills in pressure injury prevention will give you good insight into what your team's priority and strengths are. And you can use that to determine how you'll set your priorities and structure for your messaging to your team. So each item in your bundle should have an execution plan or a statement that includes a timeline and a goal and identifies the roles and responsibilities for completion of that goal. And a plan to communicate as well as the communication of the completion of the item. So for example, perhaps you would like to streamline communication with residents' family members about recommended skincare regimes for their loved ones as one of your items under your bundle. An execution plan statement might look like by December 1st, or maybe let's make it January 1st. Oh no, February, because Christmas. By February 1st, our clinical nurse educator will complete a 1-page document for families that includes information about risk to aging skin, best practice skin care, and a list of locally available recommended products to support the skin health of their family member. And this document will be provided to the direct care staff as a reference in the staff communication binder and a reference at report for the first week in February. And then it will be delivered to family members after that first week of February, as well as included in the family communication. So ideally, by the time Valentine's Day comes around, if family members are shopping for lotions or soaps or things for their family member, they have a short list of things that we can actually use when they give it to their family member for Valentine's Day. So if we would have done this in November, we could have got it ready for Christmas. But again, it's tough to shop for people who are living in long-term care. We like to get them small comfort items, and guiding family on this decision-making can be helpful so that we can use the products that they bring in safely. All right, let's look at all of the items that are recommended to be in a skincare bundle. Here are the 7 good practice bundle items from the NPIP guidelines list and as recommended. So the first item, education. The second one, we also want to do risk assessment is important. And then third, skincare and inspection, making sure that the skin is tolerating everything well. And then the fourth one, activity management. So this is going to look like turning schedules and making sure that we're offloading people from their sitting surfaces or the surfaces that they're lying on. Nutrition management is very important for skin health and safety. And then moisture and incontinence management. And then last, the support surface, managing the support surface that they're on. So these are the 7 items that are recommended. They can be packaged and presented in different ways. For example, Alberta Health Services has the S Skin Plus program, and that's just a way that they've packaged it for delivery to the community. And it's an easy to remember acronym, right? S Skin Plus, but these should be implemented in a way that speaks to your community at your individual home. So let's look at each one of these items in a little bit more detail and how we can effectively roll them out to make the whole bundle kind of come together. So education was the first item, and I'm an educator, so naturally I put that first. However, this might not be your highest priority based on your baseline assessment of your tools and the skills and attitudes of your team. So when it comes to educating your pressure injury team, it's all hands on deck. Your team is everybody. If we're not all on the same page and working together, that is where we start to see some conflict or potential for negativity that can start to build. So if the family thinks differently about how we should care for skin than the staff is thinking, then the program leaders are thinking, then we can get some friction. So we want to have everybody on the same page and moving forward positively. So we know, of course, that skin, as it ages, gets thinner and drier, creating an increased risk of injury, both from friction and from pressure. So moisturizing should definitely be a part of a daily skincare routine to improve and maintain as much as possible strength and elasticity to tolerate different pressures and frictions. So we also lose some of our antimicrobial properties of our skin as we age. So this means that we do not get this means that we do get a if we do get a skin tear or an injury, we are more susceptible to infection, and wounds are much slower to heal in older skin. So education for the care team should include the mechanism or the pathway that skin injuries happen and how to prevent them, as well as good skin care and how to encourage residents and their family towards good skincare choices. So I'll share an example from my work to illustrate why we should be on the same page. Occasionally, I visit a spa room in long-term care and I find a mountain of different skincare products. I find products that have lovely scents, but I also find products that have talc, which have known sensitizers and can also be abrasive to skin. But it's stuff that we used when we were younger and our skin tolerated it better. So family members bring these in out of good caring for their loved ones, not realizing that they might be, it might not be appropriate for aged skin. So I'll mention to the caregivers when I'm on site that these products can be abrasive to skin. They can cause drying of skin or skin damage in elderly skin. Or this one's got known sensitizers that could potentially cause rashes or lead to skin tears because it sensitizes the skin, makes it more sensitive. And they'll say, yeah, I know, of course, the residents have really dry skin, but the family say that this is what we have to use. Or it's what the resident likes and they've always used it. So when I think about the caregivers in these situations, I can see that rejecting the resident's favorite skincare product could lead to a disagreement or an argument or negativity. It's one more thing to fight about, and we definitely don't want to fight about things. And then also when it comes to the family who's bringing that in out of care and knowing the person, if I disagree with them, that's also causing negativity. And then when I think about the resident's point of view, moving into a care facility is very hard. And now you're being told when to eat and when to sleep, and maybe even when to use the washroom sometimes to manage schedules. And that's a lot of loss of freedom. And a familiar comfort item like a soap or a product that they used before they moved in is understandably something that they would fight for in the face of all of this loss. So the same thing with the family. Moving a loved one into a care home is a difficult thing to do, and they want their loved one to be maintaining their individuality in the community that's caring for them, and providing them one of their favorite things as a comfort item that's a nice gift. So rejecting a gift from a loved one can be very inappropriate as far as relationship building. So in all of these cases, education requires compassion, and arming care partners with the best resources to make best practice recommendations to residents and their family is an important part of the training for the care team, and also to support ongoing education of residents and family communities. So acknowledging that products are, it's a good product, it's got a lovely smell, it's really nice, all of the good stuff up front, and saying maybe doctors or experts are recommending something a little different for your loved one's skin at the age that they are at, to make sure that we can keep their skin as safe and healthy as long as possible. Or can we try something different? Or this is a good one. I also have another good one. Can we try this one? Or this one I've got specially for your skin to keep it healthy and safe. Like giving positive feedback and options can be helpful. Okay, so moving on from the education, which we want to share, of course, with everybody. Some resource materials that are available to you. There's no need to reinvent the wheel when you're looking for all kinds of different education material or resources that you can share with family or staff. So here's some trusted organizations that have done the work for you. The Registered Nurses Association of Ontario. It has best practice guidelines and short infographics that can be really helpful. Wounds Canada, you can visit their site and get some great information. Also, the nurses who specialize in wounds, ostomy, and continence have created best practice guidelines and resources that are ready to use based on the international guidelines on the right. And for the prevention, both prevention and treatment of pressure injuries. And then there's the National Pressure Injury Advisory Guidelines on the right there, just recently republished in 2025. So from all of these different resources or websites, you can pull in informational documents that you can share with your residents, as well as the family and the staff. Okay, moving on to number 2, risk assessment. Who is at risk of pressure injuries? So on the Pressure Injury Advisory Panel's guidelines, when you're looking at considering who's at risk for pressure injuries, mobility is the first recommendation to look at, or the first risk factor to look at. So recommendation 1.1 states that anyone with limited mobility or limited activity, or these are individuals who are high risk for potential friction-related injuries and pressure-related injuries because they're not moving. So studies show that people who are low movers, like those people on the right who aren't able to move or at the end of their life, are at higher risk of pressure injuries, of course, because they are not offloading their tissues. Also, people who are high movers, like restless legs, they're at risk for shear-related injuries. So mitigating the shear under the movement is important. So anybody who's not able to self-reposition or is limited by pain or has limited surfaces that they can be on their body because they're wounded on other surfaces are going to be higher risk. So this tool, Arjo has adopted from some ergonomists in the Netherlands. And just like any mobility tool, it has 5 categories. And this tool has added little personas to each of the risk categories just to help people of all different levels of education understand the people that we're talking about, what they're able to do and what they're not able to do, and where is their risk related to pressure injuries. So we've got the little people at the bottom who are in alphabetical order. This is a tool that you can use. If you want to access this tool, I can help you with copies of it. There might be some as well on our website. And then at the top is the icon of how this person transfers, as well as it's color-coded for their risk of both pressure injury development and also their risk of physical overload to the caregivers when helping. So we use this tool across all kinds of different assessments to look at people's mobility and what is their risk for pressure injury, as well as needs for transfers. So when it comes to skin assessment, again, the Braden scale is the gold standard. I know in long-term care, often we use some other abbreviated or shortened assessment tools because of the massive amount of work it is to do good skin assessment. But these are the NPIP recommendations when it comes to specifically a comprehensive skin and tissue assessment. So should be completed as soon as possible upon admission. And often homes will set benchmarks for the amount of time, like within 72 hours of admission or in the first week of admission, to do a good, thorough skin assessment by a qualified registered staff member. And this should be completed also on a routine basis using the Braden score or whatever tool that you're using, as well as prior to discharge. So I think PERS is one that's used in long-term care a lot, and it might be a quarterly risk assessment, but it should also be repeated if the person's condition changes. Another good practice statement, 2.6 there says consider using a subepidermal moisture device, a measurement tool, as a to look for the early biomarker pressure injury development. These are not widely used in long-term care at all yet, but starting to take some hold in long-term care. This measures the biocapacitance of tissue to see if we're starting to get subepidermal moisture, which is early inflammation in the skin before we start to see heat or reddened skin. And then this recommendation is stronger for people with darkly pigmented skin because it can be difficult to assess changes in darkly pigmented skin as early as we can in lightly pigmented skin. So a full body assessment within a shortened amount of time and on a regular basis is important. And then using a structured approach when we do our skin assessments is another good practice statement from the guidelines. There's a number of risk assessment tools. Waterlow, PERS, Glamorgan is another one, but Braden is still the gold standard. And then recommendation 1.2 says you should use this approach, a structured approach, when looking at the Braden or when looking at the skin, as well as comprehensive skin assessment that includes visual and tactile components and consideration for other risk factors. So when we're making our risk assessment, we look at all of these other supplemental risk factors, not just the items listed in the Braden. So any history of PI would put a person at a higher risk. In the 2 years after a pressure injury has closed, that skin heals to 80% of its tensile strength, but it takes 2 years to get to that 80% of its original tensile strength. So that skin will always be at higher risk of redevelopment of a pressure injury. And then diabetes, of course, affects circulation and reperfusion of blood and perfusion of blood in tissues. So diabetes is going to elevate the risk of pressure injury formation, especially in distal, like where circulation is poor in the heels. Looking at nutrition, if the person is not getting a sufficient amount of protein and minerals in their diet, they're at higher risk for pressure injuries. And then unplanned weight loss is a major risk factor for malnutrition as well as pressure injuries. So suboptimal nutrition interferes with the function of the immune system, collagen synthesis, which is the tensile strength of tissues. Then people with decreased blood oxygen due to respiratory illnesses or cardiac comorbidities, smokers have increased risk of impaired healing as well as pressure injury development. Increases in skin temperature in hot weather or the presence of acute illness can increase both the moisture and the heat of the skin. So it would increase the risk of pressure injury. So making sure we're keeping people cool and dry. Incontinence, perspiration, drainage, or from an existing wound all decrease the tensile strength of skin. Advanced age, of course, as we age, our skin weakens, and sensory or cognitive impairment all influence pressure injury risk. If we don't feel the need to move, then we might have pressure on our skin longer than we should. So a healthy individual moves involuntarily. They shift their weight regularly to offload their tissues. Even during sleep, we move approximately every 11 minutes. However, due to pain, a resident may choose not to move. Due to loss of sensation, they might not feel the cue to move. Or also due to cognitive decline, we lose initiating and sequencing movements as we change through dementia, and our brain doesn't cue us to move as frequently as it did when it was healthy, as we have losses in the motor cortex. So people who are living with dementia, even though they might still be walking, when they're at rest, they might be a low mover and not moving frequently enough to offload their tissues, which would even put somebody who is towards the lower risk end of that mobility inventory at higher risk of pressure injuries because they're advancing in their stage of dementia. So all of these things to consider when we're care planning and making our interventions for people who are in our care. When it comes to the actual physical inspection of skin, the skin care and inspection of our third item in our bundle encompasses our daily skin care routine. So inspection of skin with attention specifically over bony prominences is part of an everyday skincare routine. So direct caregivers, care aides, care partners should report any abnormal heat, roughness of skin, poor elasticity, if skin is, all of this is indicative of dehydration. Also, excess moisture is important to report, any maceration, or excess dryness, right? Our skin has a really specific range of moisture where it is the most resilient. If it's too dry or too wet or too hot, it's at risk. It's a little bit weaker. We want to be checking for non-blanchable redness. So we want to observe that during any opportunities when we see the skin during care, especially during the bath. The NPIP guidelines also state that skin should be kept clean and appropriately hydrated to maintain its integrity. So when we're thinking of clean, we don't want people to be changed as quickly as possible, which can be a real challenge, right? Although there is some new innovations, which is pretty neat. I've seen clips for incontinent products that will communicate wirelessly to tablets and indicate when an incontinent product is 30 minutes away from being too full or to its maximum level of fullness before it's not able to wick moisture away from the skin. So it helps us with management of prioritization for incontinent product changes, which is pretty cool. When we're looking at the soaps that we're using to keep skin clean, we want to use good pH balanced soaps that preserve the natural acid mantle of the skin, which is about 5.5. So no rinse skincare products are also recommended for at-risk skin to support gentle cleaning and to avoid rubbing or scrubbing fragile skin. Hydration. So we want to hydrate the skin with products that contain emollients and humectants that trap moisture and preserve it in the skin. Moisturizers should be applied daily and will be most effective when applied within 3 minutes of cleansing the skin. So while the skin is still moist but not wet, so as we're drying off, applying moisturizer right away after we're drying off. And then we also want to protect the skin. So skin, we want to protect it from excess moisture with a good barrier product and high absorbency breathable containment products. So textiles should be as lightweight and breathable as possible to keep skin cool and dry. And we talk about pressure, but it's actually shear is the much more substantial mechanism when it comes to pressure injuries. So shear, more specifically, is the combination of downward pressure and then friction, so moving across, which causes deformation of cells. So when you think about pressure, I like to use a blueberry as an analogy. So if you squeeze a blueberry, it can bounce back a little bit when you release it. If you apply enough pressure, it's going to pop. So if we squeeze a blueberry till it's a little bit under pressure, and then we slide our fingers back and forth like this and apply friction while we're also providing pressure, we can see the skin kind of tearing apart. So this is the same thing that kind of happens to the layers of our skin when we're under pressure, and then friction is happening to shear the skin apart. So we want to protect those bony prominences with padding that's multiple layers so that it gives as the skin moves. So if I have a real high risk bony prominence like a coccyx, foam prophylactic bandages that are multiple layers, ideally 7 layers of foam over top of that bony prominence, so that as the person maybe sinks down a little bit in their bed, like dressing gives with them and prevents the shear from happening, is a great way to protect that bony prominence. When we think of also shear, removing that bandage could cause some shear, right? The stickiness of the dressing can adhere to skin, and then itself could pose a risk when we're removing it. So silicone's a really great option that adheres lightly to skin, but is easy to remove without causing too much friction. So when it comes to skin inspection and maintenance, inspect, maintain, and protect is our kind of our guiding principles. And the next item on the list was nutrition. So nutrition management is number 4. The NPIP recommends nutritional screening for everybody who is at risk of pressure injury development. So a dietitian can help establish daily nutrition goals for each resident based on their risk and existing comorbidities. If a person is already wounded, healing requires extra resources. So if we have a goal of healing a wound, a person who is healing from a pressure injury or who is malnutritious or at risk of malnutrition requires extra calories and extra protein to repair their wound. So what's recommended in the guidelines is to provide 30 to 35 kilocalories per kilogram of body weight per day, and 1.2 to 1.5 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight for an adult with a pressure injury or who's healing a wound. So let's add a little perspective of that, how much protein it is, because everyone's talking about hitting your protein goals nowadays, but let's look at how many, like what would that look like on this food pyramid for a person who's 70 kilograms with a pressure injury? What would they need to eat? So they would need to eat 15 eggs and 19 slices of whole wheat toast a day to meet those requirements, which is a lot. Of course, chicken is a much more better value of protein, higher value protein food. We might not be able to eat nutrition like that, so looking at shakes to help also get hydration into people might be a good option. And then when you're required to do it, such a challenge, right? To get things into you that you're required to eat. So looking at making it fun, like ice cream has protein and calories, and it's fun, and it's something that we can do socially. So making ice cream social is kind of a regular thing to help boost a little bit of the protein intake. Also another great thing for the summertime to do on those hot summer days. And making it kind of an activity that everyone can do together is a great option. So a good practice statement from the guidelines on hydration is to offer and encourage adequate water or fluid intake to people throughout the day, especially if they're at risk of pressure injuries. It can be really hard to get liquids into folks with, especially who are living with dementia, it can be hard to get fluid into them. So working with REC, finding creative ways to help people get hydrated. There's a company that makes little like candies that come in a fancy package that are bonbons that are super hydrating, a little salty, help get water in after too. All kinds of different things to find on the market to see if we can get nutrition and hydration into these folks. But that's a little beyond my scope. So we'll move on to activity management, which is much more my scope as someone whose focus is on Patient handling and mobilizing people as much as possible, consistent with their safety. So activity management is the next item on our list. In our skin bundle, the NPIAP recommends to reposition all individuals at risk of pressure injury on an individualized schedule. So unless it's contraindicated to move them. So when determining a turning schedule, we should consider the individual, their tissue tolerance, their medical conditions, overall treatment goals, and their level of comfort and pain. So we're looking at how much are they comfortable with moving, how are we going to do it, what equipment do we have to be able to do it with. So when we're turning somebody, a 30-degree lateral sideline position is the preference and preferred to a 90-degree sideline position when we're positioning somebody. So that's just because then we're on our greater trochanter, right, when we're on our side. So pictured here is an example of a communication tool that's helpful for a turning schedule. So this communication tool could be positioned at the head of the bed. It's an example of a turning schedule that happens every couple of hours. How often are we turning somebody in a 12-hour clock? So that when I come into the room, if I'm a person who's caring for this individual and it's noon, I want to see them on their back. At 2 o'clock, I'm going to move them to their left side, and then we can try and manage the turning schedule this way. We also want to edit this because it might be that I can't put this person on their left side. So maybe it'll just have back and right side and back and right side. So being able to communicate over shifts or to anyone coming in the room who might be helping out to help with the turning schedule is great to use this kind of communication tool. And then when we think about positioning in bed, the head of the bed ideally should be below 30 degrees to reduce the shear effects of the body sliding down the bed with gravity, especially on the coccyx. So people's preferences, of course, matter, and lots of people are going to want to sit up more in bed, depending on if they're having a visit or what they're doing, to engage better with the room. So looking at equipment that also helps mitigate the risk of shear on the coccyx. So auto-profiling beds can help reduce the impact of shear forces on the coccyx. This is a bed that as the head of the bed sits up, the seat pan spreads a little bit to mitigate that pressure that's happening on the coccyx as the bed head elevates. So we can look at equipment that can help mitigate this risk when we're making our selection about beds. We also want to look at the impact of shear forces on the coccyx by coordinating movements of the head and the bed. So beds that once they're at 30 degrees or when they're below 30 degrees, the head and the legs move together. And then it can sit past 30 degrees on its own, but having the legs come up to prevent the person from sliding down the bed significantly. And then in reverse, we want, as the bed comes down, the legs to go down together with the head once it gets to 30 degrees to relieve some of that pressure and shear over the coccyx. A schedule so the schedule at the head of the bed is helpful, but also we should maybe consider a schedule for positioning while they're out of bed in their wheelchair. A lot of our chairs do tilt and recline. And then when we're sitting upright in our wheelchairs or our chairs, even right now, you sitting where you're sitting in an upright position, right now, 75% of our body weight typically is distributed over just our thighs and our backside. So this creates a high interface pressure over a small surface area of the body. So the research actually shows that if we tilt the chair 45 degrees and add a little recline, this maximizes the potential for significant blood flow increase and pressure reduction by allowing the person to offload their pelvis significantly. So making sure that we choose if we're at high risk for pressure injury and we're looking at a tilt and space chair, looking at having a schedule for sitting up and lying back and sitting up and lying back and being able to change the recline of the backrest is also really helpful. And then we also want to elevate the resident's legs, will help distribute their weight over a greater surface area. When we provide good support under people's legs and feet, or conversely, if we don't, when we're sitting, if our feet are dangling or we don't have good support under our legs and our feet, 19% of our weight would be going through our feet if they were landed on a surface. So if there's not support under the feet, that 19% is then added to the 75% of our weight that's on our backside. So we want to make sure that we provide good support and cushioning under the heels to redistribute that weight from that high interface when we're sitting. And then lastly, the most important thing probably when we're looking at pressure injury prevention and healing, the worst thing to put on a pressure injury is the person. So we want to make sure that we're positioning anyone off of areas of redness, and that we're avoiding those surfaces when we're doing our turning routine. Okay, number 6 is moisture incontinence management. Skin should be cleansed promptly as much as possible after episodes of incontinence to protect the skin from moisture-associated skin damage. Also, we want to protect the skin from perspiration, so keeping it cool and dry as much as possible. Maybe using not talc, drying talc, because it can be abrasive, but like textiles to keep the skin cool and dry, or foams. Creams can be applied to keep skin dry, and there's sprays and wipes and foam applications as well. Can be used on broken skin as well as intact skin, with each formulation having kind of different advantages or disadvantages. We want to make sure that we apply barrier products in as thin a layer as possible. Multiple layers of barrier creams are discouraged to avoid uncomfortable buildup of the product. Also, thick layers may crack once they dry and allow moisture through, which can lead to skin damage. So thin layers of barrier cream that can be cleansed away without a lot of rubbing or scrubbing to remove them, and then reapplied. Products containing chlorhexidine, gluconate, alcohol, or fragrances should be avoided, as these ingredients can be absorbed by damaged skin and cause the resident to become sensitized or have reactions to them. Body-worn containment products and textiles should be light and breathable to reduce excess heat at the skin. Increased temperature of the body can cause increase increase in the body's metabolic rate, and it can induce sweating, even to cool skin. So this increases moisture this increased moisture breaks down collagen, and it also decreases tissue tolerance, so making the skin more susceptible to breakdown under pressure and shear. We want to limit fabrics between the resident and their surface as much as possible to manage heat and moisture from perspiration. So many mattresses are made with breathable materials, and this allows air to flow through and keep the skin cool. But adding too many layers can interfere with this feature. So most manufacturer directions should be followed when it comes to specialty surfaces, especially. Pressure redistribution surfaces are often available with like specific cover material that has got a low coefficient of friction to help reduce the shear. And then there's low air loss surfaces that have special fabrics that allow the air to blow up gently against the skin to keep it cool and dry. So additional fabrics will interfere with this microclimate management therapy. If the person is feeling cold from the air blowing against their skin, then some of the pumps have like warmers in them to warm the air up that's blowing against the skin for their comfort without heating it up too much. If your resident requires microclimate management and they like to lie on cotton sheets because that's what we normally lie on beds, then there's alternative microclimate management systems such as negative airflow mattress covers. In the picture there, you can see a negative airflow mattress cover. This is a low friction textile cover that can be added to mattresses of various sizes, any kind of mattress, that draws moisture vapor down and away from the surface and through a layer of foam and out the bottom. So this kind of negative microclimate management system pulls moisture away from the skin surface interface. It's quiet, and it allows us to put a cotton sheet on top of the surface without interfering with airflow. It actually works a little bit better if you put a cotton sheet on it because it pulls the moisture out of the cotton sheet. So as the person is incontinent or sweating into the sheet, it wicks the moisture away from their skin. So all kinds of great options when it comes to microclimate management that aren't necessarily a full mattress system like low air loss that can tend to be kind of expensive. Okay, getting to the last item here. The last one is support surfaces. So here's some recommendations from the NPIAP. 7.1 aligns with the newer guidelines from the RNAO and indicates that you should choose a support surface that meets the individual's in like personal needs for pressure redistribution. And here are the factors that should be considered. Number one, the person's level of immobility or inactivity. And this is number one because we don't want to put anybody on a surface that is too soft for them to be able to move the way that they moved on their last surface if we can avoid it. We don't want to cause immobility in somebody who could otherwise move themselves because we know immobility is the number one thing that builds our risk factor, and the consequences of immobility actually would make us more at risk for pressure injuries. So we want to look at a surface that enhances the person's current level of mobility, to say it in a more positive way. And then we also want to consider the next one, the person's need for microclimate management and risk of shear. So if they have a Braden subset score, moisture score of 1 or 2, then we want to look at implementing a microclimate management system for them. And whether that's low air loss blowing against their skin or pulling moisture away from their skin would depend on the individual's needs. The next one, the size and weight of the individual is important. There's a lot of really great surfaces with a fairly low safe working load that people are ruled out of because of their weight. We also want to make sure that the surface is sufficiently wide enough to turn a person effectively, because even if we have a really excellent surface that suits the person's needs very well and moves for them, we still have to turn them because we have to mobilize fluids to help with all the other systems of the body. We don't want fluids pooling in one area. So size and weight and morphology of the person, so we can manage their turning routine and that they can have adequate therapy from the system that they're on. The next thing to consider, number, severity, and location of existing pressure injuries. Again, we don't want to put a person on a pressure injury. That's the only thing we don't want to put on it. Risk of development of new pressure injuries, so their general risk profile that we saw with their Braden score, their PERS score, and then their risk of dehydration. So there is some research that shows that low air loss, blowing air against the skin, is a risk factor of causing dehydration. So if the person's not able to get adequate fluids, then putting them on low air loss could not be the best path forward for them. And then the last one, which I think is very important, patient comfort. And this is something that was added in 2025 to the new recommendations, because rest and recovery and sleep is so important for the health of our skin. So we want to make sure that the patient is comfortable on the surface that they're on so that they can get that good rest and recovery. And then here's another recommendation. Consider using a reactive air mattress or an overlay for an individual at risk of developing pressure injuries. So there's some algorithms available, and Wounds Canada has launched a new product picker tool, which at first it looks fairly complicated. It's not very populated, but it'll walk you through looking at your local available mattresses and resources in your region and adding them to the sheet to help your clinicians make good decisions about mattresses. It's also important to know that mattresses are available for rent as well as purchase. It doesn't have to be a capital purchase. Rental is available for specialized surfaces to meet somebody's needs for a short amount of time. Okay, so getting to the end, regularly evaluating your program will help you understand if your initiatives are going well. So we want to evaluate the program at the start, make sure that we've got the items of the skin bundle, kind of all of them packaged for delivery to our communities as we'd like to see them, and then regularly evaluating your program, like after a year, to see if your outcomes are changing. And that probably looks like doing a prevalence and incidence study at the beginning and then with regular evaluations. And then it also helps us realign our goals. So making sure that our goals are SMART, so specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, timely, um, at our evaluation points, and adding individual initiatives is great. And the most important thing is celebrating the successes, what is going well, to maintain the longevity of your program, to keep people engaged in your programs. Celebrating the small wins is a great way to keep the staff interested in something that can otherwise seem fairly daunting. I've got a list of resources here that will be shared in the information after this, and my contact information if you want to get in touch with me and explore other options.